Yes, Sherry, and that partnership is crucial because today we're also talking about U.S. and South Korean officials meeting in Washington to discuss any changes to that trade pact. What are we expecting here?
Well, at this point, we're not getting a lot of intelligence in terms of what Washington would formally ask to be changed in the KORUS FTA. We've got some experts pointing to automotive, steelmaker, and rules of origin as some of the potential contentious issues on the table. But we've got the South Korean government really waiting and seeing mode at this point, with the officials saying before they flying out to Washington for the talks that's happening tonight, Asia time, saying we'll see what Washington says first, and then we'll make our counter offers or arguments here. But they also did add that they will put their national, which means South Korean interest, as the top priority in the trade talks. So we're going to have to see how that goes. In terms of the timeline, we've got a very thorough report that came out of Eurasia Group this morning that puts 60% probability for some kind of a deal to have this renegotiation process to be finished by the end of this year. We've got Eurasia Group going on to say, pointing out some of the contentious issues that could be on the table. We've got South Korea likely to satisfy Trump administration's demand to increase access for American cars in the U.S. and tighten rules of origin, especially for auto parts, and restrict Korean steel exports to the United Nations. So United States, that is. So we've got a lot of focus, especially on South Korean automakers and steel makers and potential impact from this renegotiation. It is, after all, what the Trump administration wanted in order to reduce trade deficit with South Korea, which did double over the last 6 years since the KORUS FTA took effect back in 2012. Nancy?
Sherry, thank you very much. Well, let's bring in Riley Walters now, who is a research associate at the Asian Studies Center with the Heritage Foundation, and he joins me from Washington, D.C. Riley, thank you for joining us in what I understand is quite a snowy Washington, D.C. Let's get to the substance of these trade talks. Sherry just outlined there some of the key issues that Washington is trying to strike at the negotiating table. Which of those do you think they will actually be able to get a deal on?
The autos, certainly. The autos is a questionable one. I think one of the bigger issues that I forgot to mention is, of course, agricultural, which will definitely have more contention within South Korea than the United States. Of course, the emphasis for the U.S. side is attacking this trade deficit. Of course, you know, with negotiating these free trade deals, it's always possible to improve them in some way, but the way that the administration has been approaching these trade negotiations, as we've seen with NAFTA, their approach is rather aggressive, and it might not bode well necessarily for the KORUS FTA here.
And that aggressive push, how has it impacted perceptions in South Korea? Because, yes, there are extremely important economic implications of these talks, but there's also the optics when we talk about the PR impact. And I have to wonder, from President Moon Jae-in's perspective, he doesn't want to be seen as being taken advantage of here. So when you talk about things like agriculture, do you expect South Korea to draw certain red lines, so to speak, on where they just aren't willing to compromise?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the Moon Jae-in administration is certainly thinking about how making concessions to the United States regarding agriculture will affect their future political careers. You know, when we saw Trump visit South Korea in November, him and Moon came off with a pretty good relationship, you know, definitely highlighting the strategic partnership, alliance between the United States and South Korea, and noting that the KORUS FTA, while Trump says, you know, it was a past deal, kind of changed the rhetoric in a more positive way to show that potentially, you know, they could get this deal done quickly. Whether that's still to be upheld is, you know, we won't really see for the months to come. You know, tomorrow will be mostly just finding out, when's the next meeting, when the next meeting is going to be, possibly even deciding on an arbitrary conclusion date. And of course, the United States might come out with more specifics on what it wants out of agriculture and what it wants out of automotives, things of this sort.
And the whole reason that we are here talking about a renegotiation, of course, is because President Trump has always said it was a bad deal. He feels as though the U.S. has been taken advantage of when it comes to their economic interests. Is that an accurate claim? Do you think the U.S. did get a bad deal when it was initially drafted?
No, not at all. Even when people were talking about the U.S. being a part of TPP several years ago, they would actually reference the KORUS Free Trade Agreement as the gold standard for how the U.S. should approach the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The continued rhetoric on this trade deficit by the administration has definitely sort of misguided old thinking. Trade is only good for one side. Trade is mutually beneficial, and you have to consider macroeconomic factors such as the fact that Korea's economy has been slowing, and that this actually impacts how much they can import relative to how much we buy from them.
And Riley, to what extent do you think China's relationship with South Korea and then perhaps the U.S. is going to play in these talks? Because when we think of certain industries like steel that China has a crucial interest in too with their relationships with South Korea, isn't it a very difficult balance that South Korea has to take here when it comes to really pleasing both sides?
Certainly. I mean, that's actually the fundamentals of trade, right? If you find a partner who is being difficult to trade with, you go to the next best partner. And if the United States comes forward and shows itself as a partner that's hard to deal with on a lot of these trade issues, then Korea very much should go and find out who of its neighbors offers a better deal. Much like the Trump administration is always talking about, they're trying to find better deals, and of course the South Koreans are no less likely to try and find that better deal.
Riley, thank you very much for joining us today all the way from Washington, D.C. That is Riley Walters from the Heritage Foundation.